social media does something very interesting. And of course, like it creates a very shallow debate that can actually happen. But it also saturates us with images of violence over a period of time. Like everything just seems to be so violent around us. And when we start looking at social media, so how do we set this right? How do we tell millennials, or how do we tell the youth that you have to go in depth to whatever you are actually looking at? It is more than 240 characters that you have to look at, because you're also alluding to something very interesting, that you have to look at rationality, you have to look at uh, deeply written words, which are probably a little longer than 240 characters. So you are also hinting at some very strong opinion on how education has to be looked at, how things might have to change across the board, and how opinions will have to be formed. How do you really react to this proposition or an idea?
Yeah, I agree. And one of the you know, one of the saddest things I experience sometimes in education is, when students or people who ask me for my opinions are very dismissive of thinkers very quickly because of a tweet they've read, or because of a couple of words that somebody might have said on a tweet, and then suddenly it becomes something which is, we can dismiss the entire legacy or life of a person and their work and their history because, and there's almost like this, I'm not just saying this doesn't happen sometimes with students, it also happens with some academics too, that there's this kind of assumption, oh, well, if only this person knew my arguments, or if only they did the work. And there's a kind of arrogance which permeates social media, which kind of assumes that other people don't know the arguments or haven't done the work or haven't done the reading, right? So, but I do think with social media, you're right, that it's easy now to do these kind of, I say these very kind of quick fire kind of things with the hope that something will go viral. Whereas, some of the greatest books in history never went viral, right? It took centuries before people actually read them, right? So, it's not like an immediate kind of response, very few people read Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil when he was writing it, so it's not a thing of immediacy that we're looking for you. But I think also your point about, again, one of the defining factors of social media also is the way in which it operates at the level of emotion. And, one of the great casualties after World War II was that nobody really wanted to talk about emotion in politics. Emotion was seen as dangerous, right? So for all the obvious reasons that are associated, for instance, with the likes of Adolf Hitler, Wilhelm Reich understood this brilliantly in his book on the mass psychology of fascism, where, emotion gets mobilized to devastate an effect. Now, but that was, so we have emotion written out of politics for, nearly 30, 40 years. Now, thankfully, there's been a return to recognize that emotion is important for understanding politics. But also, this can also permeate in terms of, what we might call a tyranny of emotions as well. And if you think in terms of the way in which social media operates, it's now based on the truth of emotions. My emotions are authentic, your emotions are inauthentic, therefore I must be right, and we need to shut your ideas down, right? So, and this is based on a politics of emotion, which is, if we're adapting the ideas of Georges Bataille, we might call it the affected share, right? That everybody's now affected in one way or another, or at least they tell you they are on social media. And I think it's quite an interesting experiment. If you walk down a street and you're on Twitter, you can read social media and it's almost like everybody's almost on the point of civil war, right? But actually you're walking down the street and people are happily just queuing for their latte with their face mask on, being highly obedient, probably assassinating the person in front of them while they're waiting for a coffee. You've never ever met this person before, but they're killing them on social media, right? So there's a real strange dichotomy at work there. And I think the other point, then you're right, connecting this to your question about images or representations of violence. And I'm thinking about that kind of, the recent program that we went on to with the newsmakers, this idea that the world somehow feels now that this was the worst year ever, and all this kind of, preposterous narratives. What would social media have looked like during World War II? during the height of World War II, what would social media have looked like? Or even during the Spanish flu, where 50 million people are killed, right? And not just 50 million elderly people, 50 million able-bodied people. So to me, I think part of the trauma of social media is also to make us believe now that we are the most afflicted people historically, that we suffer more than anybody else, that we suffer greater than anybody else, that, and we are the sacred victims of history, right? That, nobody really suffers like this. Even though we might have grown up with a family which is very wealthy, with a family who's providing me with a private education, a family who is sending me to one of the elite universities in the world. But you know what? I've suffered more than anybody historically. And I think there is something in that then that social media enables that. And I'm not saying that people don't suffer on their own terms, but we need to also have a healthy perspective on that precise history that you talk about.